The Whitmore winter ball unfolded beneath 1,000 trembling points of candlelight, each flame flickering as though uncertain whether to bless the evening with warmth or expose its cruelty. Snow still clung to the hems of the guests' cloaks as they entered the great hall, shaking the cold from their shoulders while servants whisked away carriages. The air was rich with pine and beeswax, yet beneath the polished surface lay something sharper. Lady Evelyn Harrowmont stepped onto the marble floor with a breath held tightly in her chest, her gloved fingers curved around the handle of her green silk fan. The gown she wore, embroidered in quiet silver, had been chosen not for ostentation but for hope, for she believed that tonight her husband might finally acknowledge her as something more than a stranger. She lifted her chin with trembling resolve, her eyes scanning the glittering crowd for the man whose affection she had never managed to earn. Whispers greeted her before any person did. They rode the air like faint draughts, brushing against her ears as she moved deeper into the hall. "Poor child, scarcely married, and already miserable," someone murmured. Another voice added, "A duchess in name, but hardly in heart." Evelyn kept walking, pretending she had not heard, though each word landed like a pin through cloth. A string quartet began a gentle waltz, and chandeliers swayed slightly with the movement of dancers. Evelyn paused at the edge of the floor, her breath visible in the cold drifting down from the towering windows. She searched for her husband, desperate for the slightest glimpse of the man who had remained so distant since the day they exchanged vows. But the hall was too crowded, and he too elusive. Lady Marbury, dressed in heavy pearls, approached with a smile too polished to be sincere. "My dear Duchess," she said, dipping her head, "I trust the evening finds you well enough." The pause before the final words stung. Evelyn offered a polite nod, determined to hold her composure. "I am content to be here," Evelyn replied gently. "A generous hope." Lady Marbury's eyes glimmered with mischief. She leaned closer. "Though peace may be more elusive for some than others." Without explanation, she drifted away, leaving Evelyn with a sudden chill unrelated to winter. Compelled by instinct, Evelyn stepped toward the great staircase overlooking the ballroom. It provided a clearer view of the hall, and she climbed the first few steps, placing her hand upon the carved banister for balance. As she looked out, her heartbeat shifted, first quickening with anticipation, then slowing with dread. There, near the shadowed alcove behind a marble pillar, stood her husband. Duke Alastair Whitmore, dressed in austere black with formal grace, had his profile partially hidden from the crowd. Yet his presence radiated unmistakably. Evelyn felt relief wash through her, followed immediately by something far colder. Another figure stood with him. A woman draped in burgundy silk, her posture intimate in its tilt, her hand resting lightly on Alastair's sleeve. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, trying to make sense of the closeness. A heartbeat later, Alastair lowered his head, not in distant courtesy but in unmistakable tenderness, and the woman lifted her face to meet him. The kiss, though brief, was devastating. Evelyn's breath collapsed. Her fan slipped from her hand, clattering against the step. For a moment, she could not move. She could only watch, frozen, as the Duke drew back with the calm of a man who had forgotten the world might be watching. Someone gasped behind her. Someone whispered, "The Duchess saw." The words spread like spilled ink, staining the air around her. Evelyn forced herself to descend the steps, though each one felt uncertain beneath her feet. The music grew distant, warbling as though underwater. She moved toward the nearest exit, determined to leave before her composure shattered. Dignity, her last remaining shield, was slipping. Outside, the courtyard was washed in moonlight. Snow had begun to fall again, soft flakes landing on her hair and shoulders. She inhaled sharply, the cold burning her lungs. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the frantic beat beneath her gloves. She had wanted so little from him. A glance. A word. Instead, she had been offered silence indoors and cruelty in the shadows. A faint echo of laughter drifted from the hall. Evelyn stepped farther into the courtyard, the snow crunching beneath her slippers. She looked toward the gate, wondering whether she had the strength to summon her carriage. Footsteps sounded behind her. She stiffened but did not turn. She feared seeing her husband, feared that he would offer some explanation spoken not for her sake but for proprieties. The footsteps grew closer, then came to a halt mere feet away. "Your Grace," a voice murmured. Not Alistair's, but another man's. Evelyn turned, breath catching as the moonlit figure stepped forward, snow gathering on his dark coat. The face she saw carried concern and resolve, and in his eyes lay something she had not found in her husband's for months: recognition. Lord Sebastian Grey had followed her into the night. For a heartbeat neither spoke, the silence between them more intimate than any comfort words might offer. Evelyn felt the heat of humiliation in her cheeks, yet Sebastian's presence steadied her in a way she could not name. He took a careful step closer, mindful not to intrude upon the dignity she struggled to hold. "My lady," he said gently, "no one should endure such a sight alone." His tone held no pity, only a quiet sincerity that made her throat tighten. Evelyn looked away, watching flakes gather on the frozen fountain. "You should return inside," she whispered. "Not unless you ask it of me," he replied. His words startled her, not for their boldness, but for the unexpected kindness within them. For the first time that night, Evelyn felt something shift, not hope, but the faint awareness that her pain had not gone unseen. The wind curled softly around them, carrying the hush of winter. Snow drifted against the stone walls of Winthorpe Manor like a quiet accusation, piling in pale ridges that swallowed the lantern light and muffled every sound. Ilara stood at the edge of the courtyard, her breath forming fragile clouds that vanished before they could warm her lips. She clutched the small velvet pouch inside her cloak, fingers trembling around the weight of the token she had sworn she would never touch again. It felt colder than the winter air, colder than the silence from the man who should have been her refuge. She had come seeking answers, but the closer she drew to the manor's iron doors, the more she felt as though she was walking into the mouth of a secret that wanted her swallowed. The Duke had summoned her, but his tone had been distant, nearly detached, as if she were no longer wife but witness. She hated that she still hoped he might look at her the way he once had, before lies began sliding into the spaces between their words. Inside, the entrance hall was dim, lit only by scattered candles whose flames bent as though bowing beneath some unseen weight. Servants whispered along the edges of the room, too quietly, too quickly, glancing at her as if she carried the scandal herself. She walked past them without lowering her eyes. She had been humiliated once. She would not be again. The Duke was waiting in his study, a place he rarely let her enter, a room steeped in the scent of ink, ash, and decisions made without her. When she pushed the door open, he looked up briefly, then returned his gaze to the ledger before him. The gesture, small as it was, stung more than an outright insult. "You received my message," he said, though it was not truly a question. His voice was cool, measured, as if he were addressing a guest rather than a woman whose heart he had once held with startling gentleness. She stepped closer, aware that the fire behind him cast shadows across his face, making it difficult to tell whether he was tired, angry, or simply indifferent. "You mentioned a matter of importance," she replied, matching his calm even as unease tightened around her ribs. He nodded and slid a folded parchment across the desk. "This arrived this morning." The seal was unfamiliar, an intricate crest shaped like a coiled serpent. Inside was a single line written in a hand she did not recognize. "Ask her where she was the night the tokens were taken." At first she thought it absurd, but then she saw the way the Duke's jaw tensed and realized he believed it. Or wanted to. "You think I had something to do with this?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. He leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing with a caution she had never seen directed at her. "3 of my most guarded items have vanished," he said. "Tokens entrusted to me by families who depend on my discretion. And you left the manor that night without explanation." The accusation, sharper because he cloaked it in restraint, cut through her with chilling precision. She could have told him the truth, but the truth was a secret she could not yet speak. So she lifted her chin. "I left because I needed air," she answered. "The walls felt suffocating, and you had not spoken to me for days." He paused, studying her as though trying to determine whether her pain was feigned. Outside, the wind howled against the shutters like an impatient witness. "You should understand," he said at last, "that appearances matter. And right now, the appearance is unfavorable." She turned away, afraid he would see how his doubt unraveled something in her. Snowflakes tapped against the windowpane, each one melting into a trembling thread of water that slithered downward like a tear the glass refused to hold. "You summoned me," she murmured, "not to ask questions, but to warn me." He did not deny it. Instead he walked to a small locked cabinet, retrieved a narrow silver key, and held it out to her. "If you have nothing to hide," he said, "then you will help me find the truth. These tokens must be recovered before the families realize what has happened." She stared at the key, realizing he was offering her a choice, though one weighted heavily against her. Accept, and she became a participant in his quiet panic. Refuse, and she confirmed his darkest suspicions. She took the key. His shoulders relaxed only slightly, yet enough for her to read how deeply this turmoil had burrowed into him. "Good," he said, though the word lacked warmth. "The investigation must remain discreet. No one can know the tokens are missing, not yet." His voice cracked on the last word, so faintly she almost dismissed it as imagination. She moved toward the shelves lining the walls, each holding boxes and ledgers with carefully inked labels. If someone had taken the tokens, they would have known exactly where those particular items were stored. Which meant the intruder was familiar with the Duke's private archives. The realization settled over her like falling frost. "Does anyone else have access to this room?" she asked. He hesitated before answering, which in itself felt like a confession. "One," he said. "My cousin. He has used this study for correspondence while overseeing estate business." Ilara felt a shift inside her, a small, cold click like a lock turning. She had never trusted the cousin's easy smile or the way he lingered near doorways he had no reason to approach. But she said nothing yet. Instead she examined the cabinet from which the Duke had taken the key. There were faint scratches near the lock, almost invisible, as if someone had tried to enter but lacked the proper tool. Someone cautious. Someone patient. Someone who wanted to avoid suspicion. She touched the marks gently, the cold metal numbing her fingers. "Whoever did this," she said, "knew they risked everything. These tokens, what do they represent?" The Duke's silence deepened. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, weighted with something darker than fear. "Debts," he said. "Promises. Secrets powerful enough to ruin families if revealed." She turned to him sharply, understanding blooming with painful clarity. "Then this isn't about theft," she whispered. "It's about leverage." He met her gaze then, truly met it, for the first time in weeks. And in his eyes she saw something she had not expected. Dread. "Exactly," he breathed. "Someone wants to use what I safeguard against us." The candles flickered, their flames bowing once more as though warned by a gust of truth pushing through the room. Ilara closed her hand around the key, the metal biting into her palm. She knew, with startling certainty, that the winter ahead would not simply test the walls of Winthorpe Manor. It would test every fragile thread still connecting her to the man who now looked at her as both companion and possible betrayer. And as she stepped back from the cabinet, she felt the velvet pouch beneath her cloak shift, pressing against her ribs like a heartbeat not her own. She froze. Because she suddenly realized the pouch was no longer as light as it had been when she'd entered the manor. Someone had slipped something inside it. And she feared she already knew what. The corridor leading to the smallest drawing room felt colder than the rest of Winthorpe Manor, as if the stones themselves knew secrets were about to be spoken and wished to distance themselves. Ilara walked slowly, every footstep softened by the thick winter carpet runner, every breath tight with the weight of the object hidden beneath her cloak. She had not dared to open the velvet pouch yet. She feared what she would find, feared even more what it would mean. The Duke's summons had been brief. "We must speak privately," and she could not decide whether it was a warning or a plea. She paused at the door, its polished surface gleaming faintly in the candlelight, and allowed her fingers a moment of stillness before she pushed it open. The room was small, lined with shelves of old books and a single window overlooking the courtyard, the glass fogged with winter air. A fire crackled in the grate, casting amber light across the table where the Duke sat alone, his hands clasped tightly, knuckles pale. He looked up as she entered, and for the first time in days his expression held neither accusation nor guarded distance. It held something stranger, something almost vulnerable. "Thank you for coming," he said, though his voice carried the strain of someone forcing steadiness. She closed the door behind her, aware of how final the soft click sounded. "You said it was urgent," she replied. And private. He nodded, motioning for her to sit. She chose the chair opposite him, maintaining a deliberate line of sight, unwilling to shrink beneath suspicion or longing. Silence stretched between them, brittle as frost. The Duke's gaze flicked briefly to her cloak. "You are carrying something," he said quietly. "I saw the shape beneath the fabric." She did not flinch. "And you followed me?" His jaw tightened. "I needed to be certain you weren't meeting someone. These past days have forced me to question much I once trusted." His honesty, stark and unadorned, cut deeper than the suspicion itself. She drew the velvet pouch from beneath her cloak and placed it on the table. His eyes sharpened instantly. "What is that?" She exhaled slowly. "Something I found after leaving your study." His breathing hitched, almost imperceptibly. "Open it," he said. She hesitated. The room seemed to narrow around her. Finally, with deliberate calm, she loosened the drawstring and tipped the contents onto the table. A single token slid out, an oval piece of darkened silver bearing the crest of the Ashford family, a token known only to a few, a token that should have been locked in the Duke's cabinet. He stared at it as if it were a ghost come to accuse him. "How did this end up with you?" he asked, voice low but trembling. She shook her head. "I don't know. Someone slipped it into my cloak. Someone who wants you to believe I'm the thief." Firelight flickered against his face, highlighting the sudden dread etched into his features. He reached for the token but stopped, hand hovering just above it. "If this is one of the missing tokens," he murmured, "then someone is not only manipulating events, they're using you as the lever." Her heartbeat pounded, each thud echoing painfully. "Your cousin," she said. "He has access. He knows the study. He knows enough about me to twist things." The Duke looked away, as though the thought had already crossed his mind and he feared its truth. "My cousin has ambitions," he admitted, "and debts." But accusing him without proof could ignite a scandal even greater than the theft itself. She leaned forward. "We don't need accusations. We need the truth, and we're not going to find it while you doubt me." He winced at that, the movement small but revealing. "I never wanted to doubt you," he whispered. "But every step I take feels like walking through a hall of mirrors. Nothing is clear anymore." She softened, though anger still pulsed beneath her ribs. "Then let's begin with clarity," she said. "Ask me what you fear most." He lifted his eyes to hers, and she saw the question before he formed it. "Were you ever unfaithful to me?" The words landed heavy, weighted with wounds and history. Ilara inhaled sharply, pain cutting through her chest. "Never," she said, voice steady despite the hurt. "Even when you gave me reason to stop fighting for us." He closed his eyes briefly, as if absorbing the truth. "And these nights you left the manor?" She shook her head. "I went to the chapel on the hill. Not to meet anyone, but to think. To breathe. To remember who I was before all of this." The Duke looked stricken, guilt hollowing the distance between them. "I drove you to that," he murmured. She did not deny it. Instead she set the token back into the pouch and pushed it toward him. "Someone is trying to divide us. And right now, we're making it easy." He stared at the pouch, then at her, something shifting in his gaze, a flicker of recognition, perhaps even remorse. "You're right," he said. "And whoever did this, they know exactly where to strike." The fire crackled, throwing sparks into the air like fragments of shattered intentions. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the windowpane, closing the world around them. After a moment, the Duke stood and crossed the room, locking the door with a decisive click. "No servants," he said. "No listeners. No interference." She watched him, unsure whether to feel relieved or unsettled. He returned to the table, his posture stiff with tension. "There is something I haven't told you," he said. Her pulse quickened. "What is it?" He swallowed, the motion harsh. "The missing tokens. They are tied to a pact made long before you arrived at Winthorpe. A pact that could ruin not only families, but the entire estate. And I believe my cousin knows enough to weaponize it." Ilara leaned forward, intuition tightening around her like a second skin. Then why hide this from me? His expression cracked, fear slipping through. Because the pact involves my father, and a betrayal that would implicate me. The fire dimmed, as if recoiling from the truth. Ilara felt the room shift, the air thickening. What kind of betrayal? She asked. He hesitated, then whispered, the kind that begins with a lie and ends with blood. And before she could speak, someone tried the locked door. The handle rattled again, sharper this time, rattling the silence between them. Ilara rose instinctively, but the Duke motioned her back with a firm shake of his head. The fire guttered in the grate, as if bracing itself for what might follow. Whoever waited on the other side of the door carried either boldness or desperation, perhaps both. When the footsteps finally retreated, fading down the corridor, Alistair exhaled slowly, the breath shaking. "We have little time," he murmured. "My cousin is losing patience." Ilara steadied herself. "Then speak plainly. If you want my trust, give me truth without ornament." His jaw tightened, but he nodded. He moved to the window, watching snow swirl across the courtyard like restless ghosts. "My father's betrayal," he began, "was not a matter of treachery against the crown or estate. It was a betrayal of blood." The words deepened the chill in the room. Ilara waited, her hands curling against her skirts. He continued, voice low. "My cousin's family was meant to inherit half the estate. But my father altered the agreement, concealed documents, and ensured the full legacy came to me alone. The tokens, those silver seals, were the proof. My cousin has sought them for years." Ilara felt the truth settle heavily. "And now he wants them to destroy you." Alistair turned, meeting her gaze with an intensity that startled her. "He believes I knew of my father's actions, that I stood willingly upon stolen ground. He intends to expose everything, and you are the easiest path to weaken me first." She swallowed hard. "Then why hide this? Why keep me in the dark while letting suspicion tear us apart?" His voice broke, raw and unpolished. "Because I feared your judgment more than his schemes." She blinked, stunned. "You feared me." He stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking in a single breath. "Your goodness frightens me. Your clarity. I have lived my life with secrets pressed into my bones. And you walk as though truth is a garment you wear naturally." She felt heat rise in her chest, not from flattery but from the sincerity threading through every syllable. "Alistair," she whispered, "I wanted to be your partner, not your shadow." His expression tightened. "Then let me correct that." He crossed the room, retrieved the token pouch she had returned, and pressed it into her hands. "Keep this," he said. She stared. "Why me?" "Because if I fall, you must be the one who holds the truth. And because I trust you more than anyone left in this house." Her breath trembled. It was not a declaration of love, nor an apology, yet it carried the weight of both. The fire brightened suddenly, crackling as though punctuating the moment. A shift had taken root, small, delicate, but undeniable. "What do you intend to do?" she asked. The Duke drew himself up, shoulders squared with a resolve she had not seen since their wedding vows. "I intend to confront him, not as a passive heir but as the rightful Duke of Winthorpe. And I will not allow him to use you against me again." His certainty steadied her. For the first time, they stood not as adversaries or wounded strangers, but as allies facing the same storm. Yet fear tugged at her. "Alistair, he is dangerous." "So am I," he replied softly. The word startled her, a reminder that beneath his restraint lived something formidable. He approached, voice lowering. "But before I face him, I need something from you." Ilara's heart tightened. "What?" His eyes held hers, steady and unguarded. "The truth of your heart. Not out of obligation, not to reassure me, but because I cannot step into this battle clouded by what I fear you feel." Her pulse hammered. "You want a confession. Only if it is freely given." The fire cast shifting shadows across his face, softening the stern lines, revealing the man who had been hidden beneath regret and pride. She drew a breath. "Alistair, I cared for you before I had reason to. I tried to bury it when you pushed me away. But feelings do not vanish when bruised, they simply learn to ache quietly." His expression flickered with something devastatingly gentle. "And now?" She hesitated, choosing each word with care. "Now I stand before a man who finally sees me. And it terrifies me how much that matters." A tremor of relief moved through him. "Ilara," he said, voice thick with emotion, "I cannot promise perfection. But I can promise loyalty, to you, and to the truth we uncover together." She felt the room shift again, warmer now, as though the house itself recognized the new allegiance taking shape. He reached out, not touching her, but offering the space between them like a vow. "When I declare my side tonight," he said, "I want the entire manor to know I stand with you." Her breath hitched. "That will create scandal." "Good," he murmured. "Let scandal serve justice for once." But even as hope stirred, uncertainty crept into the edges. What if your cousin does not back down? What if he already holds the missing tokens? Alistair's expression hardened. "Then I will expose the truth he forgets. Not all legacies are written on parchment. Some are forged in character." He moved toward the door and rested his hand on the lock. "Stay here," he said. "If he confronts me, I do not want you caught between us." Ilara stood. "No. If you face him alone, he'll twist whatever happens. If I am to be used as leverage, let me at least be present to shatter the attempt." He hesitated, and then nodded. "Very well. But stay behind me." He unlocked the door, the metal clicking with unnerving finality. Before he opened it, he turned back to her, a storm of determination and tenderness in his eyes. "Whatever you see tonight," he said, "remember this moment between us. Remember the choice I make now." She stepped forward, breath trembling. "And what choice is that?" He opened the door slowly, the corridor stretching before them like an uncertain path. His answer came quiet but resolute. "I choose you." But as the light from the hall spilled inside, a voice drifted from the far end, cold, amused, and unmistakably familiar. "Dear cousin, how touching!" And the Duke froze. The grand ballroom of Winthorpe Manor, once a place of whispered glances and restrained laughter, now vibrated with tension as though the walls themselves anticipated the confrontation. Alistair moved with calculated calm, Ilara just behind him, her gloved hand brushing the folds of her emerald gown. Candlelight shimmered across crystal chandeliers, catching on the golden threads in her hair and the silver cufflinks on his sleeves. Every footstep echoed like a drumbeat, announcing that the reckoning had arrived. Guests lingered near the edges of the room, their conversations stuttering into silence as the Duke and his cousin confronted one another. Alistair's cousin, dressed in a deep burgundy coat, offered a cold smile, but the warmth of triumph was absent. He knew he faced a man who had chosen his side and strengthened his resolve with every step. The air was heavy with anticipation, the scent of wax, pine, and winter roses mingling with the unspoken danger that rippled between them. Ilara felt her pulse quicken, fingers tightening around the pouch that contained the recovered tokens, the proof of schemes, betrayal, and truth. She met Alistair's eyes, and in them she saw not just the Duke, but the man who had finally decided to claim his honor, his heart, and her trust all at once. "Enough of the charade," Alistair's voice rang through the room, steady, commanding attention without a single raised hand. Guests instinctively fell silent, sensing the storm beneath his calm exterior. "You have overstepped, cousin. You have meddled, stolen, and sought to undermine me at every turn. And you have involved her, my wife, in your deceit." His gaze flicked to Ilara, not accusatory, but filled with a fierce, protective fire. The cousin's smile faltered, though he hid it behind a polite bow. "Words, as usual, are your armor," he replied, voice smooth but lacking conviction. "And yet, they fail when confronted by proof." Alistair gestured, and the pouch passed into Ilara's hands. She opened it, letting the tokens spill onto the marble floor. Guests murmured as the silver glinted beneath the chandelier light, each piece a testament to promises broken and power sought. Alistair stepped closer to his cousin, voice lowered. "These were entrusted to me, not to your ambitions. And anyone who thought they could manipulate me through her has misjudged gravely." Ilara's breath hitched. She could see the realization dawning in the cousin's eyes. His plot, meticulously planned, unraveling in moments. Alistair reached for the nearest token, holding it aloft like a banner of authority, and turned his gaze fully upon Ilara. "You," he said, softer now, but no less intense, "stood by me when suspicion and whispers sought to divide us. Your courage, your clarity, your steadfast heart, this is why I take my side tonight." The words struck through her like sunlight-piercing storm clouds. She felt warmth rush to her cheeks, a mixture of pride, relief, and longing she had tried to conceal for so long. His presence steadied her, the aura of command he carried blending with something profoundly tender. The room seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them tethered by unspoken truths finally voiced. The cousin took a step forward, as if daring to reclaim the advantage, but Alistair's hand rose, a silent command that halted him. "Leave," the Duke said, voice sharp, final. "This house is no longer your battlefield. Your schemes end here." The cousin's shoulders stiffened, pride battling humiliation, but the gleam of defeat flickered behind his eyes. Without another word, he withdrew, the murmurs of the guests filling the vacuum he left behind. Alistair turned fully to Ilara, the room quiet now except for the faint crackle of the fire and the subtle hum of tension released. "You could have been compromised, endangered," he said, the undercurrent of worry barely restrained. "And yet, you held your head high, unflinching." She met his gaze, her own resolve mirrored in his intensity. "I did what I had to," she whispered. "For truth. For us." He reached for her hand, fingers curling around hers with an electricity that made her heart stutter. And then, the moment that had been both delayed and inevitable arrived. The world seemed to shrink until it contained only them, the firelight flickering, the chandeliers suspended in a halo of anticipation, and the tokens glinting faintly on the marble between them. Alistair's eyes searched hers, a question unspoken, a promise forming. "This, everything, was meant to be shared with you," he murmured. "Not whispered, not stolen, not shadowed by fear." His other hand lifted, brushing a stray curl from her face, and for a heartbeat, the past months of doubt, distance, and whispered heartache fell away. She did not retreat. She could not. She had waited for honesty, for alignment of courage, for acknowledgment of the bond that had endured every secret, every shadow. And now, finally, it was offered in its purest form. Their lips met, first with a careful hesitation of two hearts long restrained, then with the intensity of every withheld longing and every fear conquered. It was not a kiss born of scandal or impulsive desire, but of recognition that they had survived the darkness, survived the manipulations, and emerged aligned against a world that had tried to pull them apart. Time seemed to still around them. Guests, far removed, whispered and shuffled, but Ilara and Alistair existed in the center of a private orbit, where every glance, every breath, and every heartbeat was magnified. Her fingers tightened on his coat, and he drew her closer, protective and unyielding, a fortress built from both love and resolution. She could feel the tremor of relief in him, the culmination of every decision he had made to choose not power, not pride, but her. When they parted, barely, their foreheads resting together, Alistair's voice, low and reverent, reached her. "I take my side, Ilara, always. And I will defend it, no matter the cost." She smiled softly, tears threatening the corners of her eyes, and replied, "Then we stand together." The tokens on the floor, glinting silver in the candlelight, bore witness to a battle concluded, not with violence, but with truth, courage, and love. The cousin's machinations had failed, the danger resolved, yet the sense of triumph was tempered by the understanding that vigilance would always be necessary in the halls of power. Still, for this night, the victory was theirs. Alistair held her hand, the clasp firm, grounding, unbreakable. The chandeliers shimmered as though echoing the new alignment between them, a luminous affirmation of choice, of loyalty, of a shared heart. The ballroom had transformed. What had been a space of treachery and whispered doubts now resonated with the quiet authority of resolved tension. Guests gradually returned to the edge of the dance floor, sensing that a decisive turn had been made, Yet no one dared speak over the quiet declaration between the Duke and his Duchess. The tokens lay scattered, proof and emblem both, yet their significance had shifted. They were no longer instruments of manipulation, but symbols of trust, of trial survived, of bonds unbroken. Alastair leaned closer, voice softer, almost tender. "I have waited for this moment longer than I realized," he said. "And I will not let it pass unclaimed again." She placed her free hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath the fabric of his coat. "Then let it not pass," she whispered. They shared a glance, one luminous with the intensity of private understanding, then a second kiss, gentler this time, a confirmation rather than a claim, sealing both the promise and the night. And just as the warmth of reconciliation settled over them, the distant sound of carriage wheels echoed across the frost-covered courtyard. Ilara drew back slightly, sensing that while tonight they had emerged victorious, the world beyond the manor's walls still stirred with whispers and intrigue. She glanced at Alastair, whose eyes, steady and certain, met hers. "Whatever comes," he said, "we face it together." And in that promise, she found the courage to smile, knowing the kiss meant for her had sealed not just longing, but allegiance, trust, and the irrevocable choice of two hearts aligned against the shadows yet to come.